counselors, approach the bench.
I have no further witnesses, Your Honor.
Curiosity, I'm allowing this freak show to continue.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask for a recess.
Overruled.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Welcome to Movie Mistrial,
the podcast where we examine the IMDB top 250 and argue for or against the movies being on that list.
My name is Johannes.
And I'm Raji.
Today, we are talking about another film on that list.
Peter Jackson's first part of the fantasy epos, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Fellowship of the Ring was released on December 23rd, 2001, starring Elijah Wood, Viggo Mortensen, and Cate Blanchett, with an IMDb rating of 8.8 out of 10.
Before we go to Middle-earth, however, how is life?
Life is good, despite all the fires in California. But yeah, life is good. Life is good. Long weekend. We're recording this Labor Day weekend. Good times. How's life on your end? How's the baby?
I think the smoke has been the smoke here in California has been pretty bad for me. Especially someone who has allergies. It's not been great, and I have to walk my 2 dogs every day. But you know, it is what it is. We have to give credit to people who are actually fighting it instead of us keyboard warriors, I guess. Very true, very true. But I hope the fires get under control soon. And to all the people who've been affected by it, especially the people in the Tahoe area and people in the northern areas, I hope that they find some sign of solace soon. Because it's we get the periphery of it, but I hope that those people who are directly affected by it can recover.
Yep. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, should we cast the time?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
So, do I get to choose? Or, yes, I get to choose.
You get to choose.
I always go with heads.
Heads.
So,
heads.
I hope it's a tail. I want to see which one you're going to go for.
Tail.
Right. Let's see. What do you want?
I want to argue for this movie.
You want to argue for this film? All right. And I'm going to argue against this film.
Sounds like a plan.
But I guess before we start, I think we should go through the plot and try to get a summary of what the movie is about. What do you say?
Sounds good. That alone will probably take a minute.
All right.
All right. See you on the other side. An ancient ring, thought lost for centuries, has been found, and through a strange twist of fate, has been given to a small hobbit named Frodo. When Gandalf discovers the ring is in fact the One Ring of the Dark Lord Sauron, Frodo must make an epic quest to the Cracks of Doom in order to destroy it. However, he does not go alone. He is joined by Gandalf, Legolas the Elf, Gimli the Dwarf, Aragorn, Boromir, and his 3 hobbit friends Merry, Pippin, and Samwise. Through mountains, snow, darkness, forests, rivers, and plains, facing evil and danger at every corner, the Fellowship of the Ring must go. Their quest to destroy the One Ring is the only hope for the end of the Dark Lord's reign.
The witness will address this court as Judge or Your Honor.
To the judge, the crowd, the listeners, today I'm going to be arguing against this movie, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings. A movie that looks and sounds spectacular, but carries a lot of dead weight, lots of swooping shots, lots of characters that don't change, in a very thin plot over the course of 3 hours. I think that we get to experience this movie through trenches, mountains, forests, caves, and we get to experience the world through the eyes of hobbits, humans, dwarves. But at the end of the film, nothing really changes from the very beginning. The goal was to get the ring to the mountain, to Mordor, and drop it in the crap. Let me get this right. to drop it in the volcano, where no one can reach it, and we at the end of the film we were no closer to it than when we first started. In fact, I would say we were in a worse position. I guess I will discuss this further, and I would give you the points that I would like to argue for it.
Sure, Your Honor. I could not agree less with that. This is a movie that takes really some time to establish all the different factions of Middle Earth, because it's going to be vital for the rest of the trilogy. I think one has to take into account that this is kind of the setting up part of a trilogy. Mind you, it's a 3-hour long setup for what's to come, but it's a story that is so rich and varied with different characters, different locations, and different motivations that we need to take the time to understand each and everybody's point of view. Now, you said that there's no development. I think this story, even if we just look at this as a contained movie, already has an arc of courage from the most unlikely character set that we encounter in this movie, namely the hobbits, that are arguably just living their lives in Hobbiton, and happily so, and rarely move out of their boundaries, but then are kind of thrusted into a story that is bigger than themselves, because it's literally affecting the whole country, Middle Earth. The whole Earth? I'm not super invested with the lore. The whole Earth, be it Middle Earth. And so we have the unlikeliest heroes having to step up. And the reason why they're the most unlikeliest heroes is that they're so underappreciated that nobody even kind of considered them for a ring in the first place. If we just go through the prologue a little bit, it's like men got a bunch of rings, the elves got a bunch of rings, the dwarves got a bunch of rings, and ain't nobody gave the hobbits some rings. So right from the get-go, it's kind of clear that they're just kind of, in the grand scheme of things, not as important as these other factions. But it turns out they're the most important because they're not as allured by the ring. And I think this movie kind of sets it up fairly well, that it's this underappreciated small faction, both in just terms of population, but also literal size, that turns out to be the hero of this, the underappreciated hero. And in terms of nothing changes, I think there's already quite the character development for everybody involved in the Fellowship from the start, but all the way up until the end. And I think Boromir's death is kind of the catalyst for a lot of the development to happen. But yeah, that's my opening statement. Looking forward to talk more about this.
So I think that let's talk a little bit about some of the points you just made. You talk about the courage of the hobbits. I don't remember at any point where they did anything courageous in this film. I think this whole film was them being anxious and running away from things and being saved by other people.
I actually disagree, because when they're in Moria and they're faced with the orcs, like they pick up their swords and they're there to fight. Like they're kind of caved in, but it's a Hail Mary and they're ready. They're ready for it.
If they weren't ready, they would be dead. So I think that was more of a fight and flight situation. I don't think that the hobbits were. First of all, they were the ones who created that issue. Let's even look at the whole history of the hobbits in this film, and I think that we should look at it from just the self-contained version, just this movie alone. This movie starts with the introduction of the history, and we're taken straight to the hobbits, a bunch of, drinking, pipe smoking, happy go lucky folks who doesn't want to have anything to do with the world outside. They're kind of self-contained, self-content, and they see Bilbo, who went out of his way to explore the world, as some sort of magical person. He's looked at with awe, but nobody else wants to do something like that. I mean, a point could be seen when Frodo and his friend got to the edge of the farm, and when they got there, he says, "This is the farthest I've ever been from Hobbiton," and it took him a few minutes to actually step. It took several minutes for Sam to actually go further. And then
that alone is courage too.
Is it courage? I think that he was just nosy and got himself in trouble. Now, one of the other things, then we have the bumbling friends, the friends who are mischievous, and the characters was one of the things that I can say for sure was that the character of all the hobbits were set up at the very beginning, and throughout the whole trilogy, none of their characters changed. What was Frodo? Frodo is the reluctant hero. He trusts people too much. He trusted Sam. He trusted Viggo Mortensen's character Aragorn. He trusted
Strider.
Yeah, he trusts every single person, and he always he's too trusting. Sam is a bumbling idiot. He goes out of his way to fight without thinking, brings out his sword. He's not tactical in any way. The two friends, Merry and Pippin, always getting into trouble, and you could tell within the first few minutes that they were always going to get into trouble. And they got into trouble at the beginning. They got into the trouble at Moria. They got into trouble almost all through the film. In fact, the fact that these hobbits couldn't understand the dangers they were facing is enough to give them a ding. I mean, they're on the top of a mountain. There's darkness everywhere, and these guys decide to whip out the fire and cook some sausages, inviting the kings to come and stab Frodo in the chest. One of the problems I have with this movie is I don't know all the names, and I'm not a Lord of the Rings expert, so you'll have to forgive me as I use algorithms to determine who I'm going to talk about. So, I feel that the character development was stale. Aragorn was the same mysterious character from the beginning of the film to the very end. Did we learn anything new? We had to get to the real meat of his character was in the third film.
Actually, sorry that I have to break you up there, but
Sure.
I mean, we learn Aragorn, like we get to know him as Strider, this mysterious ranger, which arguably is a little stupid, but Strider. And then at the end of this, he takes on that arm shield from Boromir from Gondor, and because he's the true heir of Gondor, so it's like he sheds that Strider character of himself, and he's turning into Aragorn. So that alone is, kind of is a big character progression in my book.
But I don't see how it was a character progression. I mean, when they were at the council in Rivendell, it was what's his name? Legolas introduced him as Aragorn, the true heir of Gondor. And what's his name? Boromir responded, "There is no heir. Gondor needs no king." So we already knew who he was. And that was just an hour, 20 minutes into the film, give or take, into the 3-hour film. So it wasn't a situation where his identity was hidden. His identity was not hidden. It was hidden as a Northern Ranger, but his character stays the same. His character, Aragorn, as the Northern Ranger, mysterious, sitting in the dark with a cape over his head. It was the same character till the very end. He was quick to action. Um, he was he was always very direct, and the character didn't change. So the if all the characters stayed the same, I mean, the only person who changed, uh, but it was only a metaphysical change, was Gandalf. He went from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, but that's outside the scope of this film. So let's just say the characters stayed the same throughout the film. What makes this film good is the fact that we're going to see a good story. So the story has to be very, very good. But the story was interjected with scenes and scenes of the beautiful, swooping landscape of New Zealand, people running away from things, running. And anytime you're doing all those running actions, nothing is going on. You're just basically just escaping. So the thrill of the action is what sells this film. I'm not entirely sure. I agree with you when you say the characters develop. The characters did not develop. I think that the movie was quite long, and I think that all those swooping shots and all the escapisms played a big role in making this film not as cohesive and tight as it could be.
I mean, like I said, I disagree because I think that Aragorn especially has already quite the transformation. Like, he's not that mysterious ranger anymore at the end of this. Same arguably for Gimli, where I sense a lot of pride in the dwarves, and he got kind of shattered and gained new motivation when they went through Moria, and realizing that it's not this dwarf kingdom anymore, but it's a tomb essentially. And then the hobbits, like I said, it's kind of an unlikely event for them to go that far and to be on this adventure. And sure, like, all four of the hobbits are very different and play different parts in this, and some of them are kind of in quotes bumbling idiots, and one could say annoying, but and you could say that's such a lazy plot to draft a story forward, and I would tend to agree with that probably. But I think it's ultimately, this is a story about unlikely loyalty. You have all these different factions that seemingly historically were fighting against each other, and now they come together because what's at stake is bigger than the individual person and the individual faction. And I think that's the core and the heart of this movie, and it happens to be carried by the hobbits, that are the unlikeliest of them all, because, as I said in my opening, they're not even kind of regarded as worthy of a ring in the first place. So for them to carry this, and for them to carry the burden and the gravity of the whole situation, literally, is remarkable. And I think that's being set up in this quite well.
Well, I can agree with you on the fact that the hobbits are quite unlikely. It's not because of their small size, because the hobbits, the dwarves are also small. I think the dwarves and the hobbits, they are somewhat similar. I would say that probably the reason why they're the most unlikely of heroes is because they are very incompetent. And I think that their incompetence is what makes the film quite remarkable. And I use air quotes in this analogy. Their incompetence is literally what makes the film interesting, because the dwarves are also small, and they were not the only ones that didn't get rings. The orcs didn't get rings, the trees didn't get rings, the birds didn't get rings, so the dwarves didn't get rings. So they're not as special as you make it. It's just a Gandalf fascination with hobbits that made them the focus of this. Though there is a history, and the fact that Bilbo brought the ring to the Shire is probably what makes this whole thing happen. But we could also tell that the ring has a mind of its own. So, maybe it was always going to end up in the Shire, no matter what.
Gotta look that up. Yeah, the dwarves got seven rings.
This dwarves got 7 rings?
Yeah, the dwarves got 7 rings.
Oh, well, then, was that mentioned in the movie?
Yeah, in the prologue.
Oh, yes. Oh, God. All right. Well, that goes that
Fail. Back to the drawing board, sir.
Okay.
As to your arguments for kind of the landscape and the sweeping, the cinematography, I guess, I think it's a display of scale that is being set up, and just understanding how what all is at stake. Like every little part of the land between Mordor and the Shire essentially is affected by this one action, like getting from A to B, right? And and everybody in between, all the people that live there, which arguably we don't meet that many people that live anywhere, will be affected by this. So I think that's just one way to understand. Okay, this is at stake. Plus, it's pretty. I think that helps. Right? It's visually interesting to see.
Well, true. I think that the argument that New Zealand is beautiful, it will not be lost on me. I'm not going to argue here that New Zealand is not beautiful. But I think that the question is, the sweeping shots just help to create ambience in the adventure and to make it feel like there's an adventure going on. My argument was that there was quite a lot of it. Walking up the mountains, sweeping shot. Going down to the forest, sweeping shot. Going on, walking through the Rocky Mountains, sweeping shot. And there's a lot of coincidental situations that kind of made it a little bit hard to believe. Like the first time they came across the riders, Frodo goes, "Oh, we've got to hide. Get off the road." Yeah, he says, "Get off the road. Get off the road. Get off the road." And they jump down and they get inside under one of the trees where the roots existed and it was high enough for them to hide. And later on, Aragorn was saying, those guys are drawn to the power of the rings. And I was looking at the wraith, and he was standing right above them, and he couldn't sense the ring just underneath him. He was sniffing the air, he was doing all sorts of shenanigans, and he couldn't tell that the ring was right under his nose, literally. Then you have the fact that they built them up to be this powerful beings. These guys cannot be defeated. They're the souls of kings who've lost their minds. And the first moment they come across water, they're just like, oh shit. I mean, sorry. The first time they come across water, they're like, oh man, we can't go into the water. The first time, they had what? 5 of them that was fighting against Aragorn in the mountain. This marvelous undead wraiths that go on horses and fly everywhere, and they couldn't beat Aragorn on just one guy. They couldn't go around him and stab him in the back. I'm wondering how powerful these guys are.
Well, he is the rightful heir of Gondor.
Well, I don't think that doesn't mean they can't kill him.
Well, evidently it does. So
there's a lot of movie magic happening. What about that scene where the orc had the shield and he throws it, and the shield goes all the way? Could have cut his neck off, but it had a concave edge, and the 2 spikes went into the tree, just giving him enough room for him to wiggle his neck. And I was like, wow, lots of coincidences in this film. who is gonna get killed? I mean, somebody eventually did, but there's a lot of suspense of disbelief in this film. So
Well, I think so. So, like I said, it's a story about loyalty, and it's also a story about pureness of character, right? Like how can you be corrupted? And I think it's pretty clear that everybody in the Fellowship that is kind of on target to not be corrupted by the ring is making it out, and the only person that is corrupted by the ring ends up dying in this one. And I think that's kind of a compelling kind of tangent on the core of this movie. It's a lot about loyalty. It's a lot about greed and corruption, and kind of like how to go against that. And I think that's another aspect of character building there, because if you get corrupted, then the dark side. I think that's also in the Saruman kind of character arc, essentially, right? Like that's corruption at its core, and greed, power, like being greedy for power, that turns to be your downfall in the long run.
Just to correct, I did mention that no rings were given to the dwarves, and I think you corrected me earlier, but I do want to acknowledge that 9 rings were given to men, 7 rings to dwarves, and 3 rings to the elves, and 1 ring to rule them all. So before I get the emails, I'm correcting myself. But I think that this question of loyalty is one that I probably want to address, and I think that you've mentioned loyalty quite a few times now, but I'm not entirely sure who were they loyal to. Were they loyal to the quest, or were they loyal to? So but the thing about it is they weren't pulling in the same direction, and even at some point, Frodo never trusted anybody in there, especially when she told him that at some point he's going to come and get the ring from you. So, that fellowship was always bound to break. The question is, when was it going to? And I think that if you are saying the strength of the film is loyalty, there was no loyalty. There was no loyalty between Gandalf and Sauron. There was no loyalty between Frodo and the people, and there was no and other members of the Fellowship, and there was no loyalty between Boromir and every other person. So I'm not entirely sure if that is as strong an argument as I would have liked.
Well, my point is that, like at its core, this movie is between the battle of loyalty and greed for power, right? So that and we see that in the Fellowship, like where like this underlying corruption has a tendency to destroy things that are good, right? And then, but if you band together to kind of work together with the unlikeliest set of characters, you can at least make it out alive, if you have that the kind of trust with everybody involved. And I think Boromir failed that test. So I think it's not necessarily a display of like unwithered loyalty, but I think it's as a theme, it's loyalty versus corruption. Right?
Got it.
And
okay.
As and then it's kind of this push and pull, and then if you're not loyal to the cause in a way, which is the quest as a whole, then that's going to be trouble for you in the long run, right? It's like.
So do you feel like the length of the film was justified?
I do think there are some areas that could have been streamlined a bit. I agree with that.
Cool.
I give you that one, but
Okay. I'm gonna give you the fact that the landscape is beautiful, and I'm gonna give you that the score is amazing. But I do think that at some point the film devolved into a walking simulator with long shots, helicopter shots of people walking up mountains and walking up, And I think at some point, I think I'm done with my arguments. I think we should probably. I probably will start to go around in circles, but maybe we can talk a little bit more in general about the film.
Sounds good.
But I didn't know if you have any points you wanted to make.
No. Let's go over to general arguments and just kind of talk about the movie and then take it over there.
Sure.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask for a recess.
And we're back.
I'm gonna say this for sure. I like the film. I like Lord of the Rings. My wife is the biggest fan of Lord of the Rings, and I don't generally watch it with her, but every few months she's going through all 12 hours of the film, and anytime I feel like it, I sit down and I watch with her. So I'm aware of the trilogy. I'm not the biggest biggest, what do you call it, fantasy person. I prefer more logical stories.
Yeah.
But I will say the movie is good. Every single time I sit down and watch it for 10, 15 minutes, it draws me in. It's a very sultry, seductive film because it makes you, worry about the characters. But I think that if you wanted to use a good critique eye, you'll have to agree that even some of the characters are stilted. Legolas in this film, not great. The Legolas in the next film was great. And the Legolas in the final film, The Return of the King, was great. But Legolas in the Fellowship of the Ring was stilted. I don't know. He was not as strong as he was in the second and third film.
I mean,
And
he doesn't get to do much, right?
Yeah. I mean, so those are some of the things that, like, if you really want to look at it, the dwarf, and I think this is the thing I've hated the most about the film. The dwarves are just a laughing stock, and they played for jokes from the very beginning to the very end. And I don't think it changed at all for the three films. Like, I think it falls under the argument that the characters don't change at all. But some of the jokes don't really fly anymore. I mean, I don't even think they flew in the days when the movie came out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So when I argued against the third one, right? And I watched this one, and I was like, a lot of the points that I had for the third, mainly it looking pretty bad. Like, I think a lot of the effects don't hold up anymore. Are completely alleviated in this. Like, I think this looks still very good. Partially because we don't have these crazy mass CGI scenes. We have a lot of mixture of miniatures and like real sets and all that make things that are real, right? And then it's just mixture. Like, a lot of the stuff is well to real. A lot of the forced perspective stuff that they do in this one, like on the cart in the beginning and then the kitchen and all, that's great. So like that basic critique, interesting enough for me. Like, it's gone for this one because I think this one's a lot better in that aspect. In terms of characters, I think it is kind of suffering from being the first movie because it's all set up, right? It's all exposition. And I remember that for the third one, I critiqued that there's still exposition in that movie. It's still like long dialogues about the Ghost Army and whatnot because it's just so rich of background information, this whole world. But I think in this movie it's done a little better because it is taking its time to do this, and we do understand the core characters fairly well. I mean, mainly the four hobbits, and then Aragorn, because I agree with you that Legolas and Gimli are very much side characters. Boromir are just, he's just corrupted and then dies. And who else is there? Gandalf. Gandalf is weird in this movie, I thought. Like, I'm a little disappointed by the acting now, looking back at it. So I felt like that was one of the cheesiest acting jobs in this movie, personally. And Saruman is the other big character here, and yeah, I don't know. The whole wizardry stuff is a little cheesy for my tastes as a whole, I think.
I feel the same way when I watch Harry Potter. Harry Potter. It's like Excellium Splibumbulum. It's like, okay, fine. I don't care too much about magic. It's just but I kind of agree with a lot of things that you said. I think first of all, if I was gonna rate the 3 Lord of the Rings films, this would be my second best. Right? My first is the second one, which what was the name of the second one?
Two Towers.
Two Towers. Oh man, the Two Towers is just awesome. And this one would be my second best, and The Return of King would be my worst. Least best, should I say, not worst, but least best, because in this one we got the adventure, in the other one we got the battles, and in the third one they wanted to give us the adventure and the battles in one film, and it just felt like a lot of retreads. But I really appreciated like a lot of the setup in this film. I appreciated some of the characters, the eagle, controversial eagle, that has caused a lot of conversations about, why didn't they just take the rings with the eagle and just drop it into the volcano? It's a valid question.
Because they were salty that they didn't get a ring.
So it's a big plot hole. But, and I think that the movie has a lot of plot holes. Like, the horse versus hobbits. How the hell did the hobbits escape? How the hell did the hobbits get to the river? How the hell did Frodo survive a horse chasing him? I don't know. And, the rates are inconsistent. Yeah, they're quite inconsistent because they killed only one person, and the guy who was like, "Who goes there?" with a lantern. I don't remember what he said, but he had the lantern as the guy was coming, and he raised out his sword and he stabbed the guy, whipped him down, and that was the only killing that they had throughout that. The other killing they supposedly had was when they walked into the tavern and tried to stab all 4 of the hobbits, and they realized that it was not there. They weren't there, and then they just jumped on their horses and run away again.
Yeah, I agree that they're kind of a letdown, because even when they're on that that tower, where there's that big climactic scene that you mentioned with the fire that draws them in. It starts off with the race against the hobbits, and the hobbits hold their own for quite a while.
Yeah.
Right, so that's kind of wild if you just think about that for a second, and then against all better judgment, Frodo puts on the ring, and nothing. I mean, he gets stabbed, but that turns out to be somewhat inconsequential too, right? So I agree with you that it's just inconsequential because it's like they're propped up as being this huge threat, but then it's nothing.
Yeah.
Really.
Let me just give you this scenario. If I was one of these rates, and I get to that whatever, the mountain where they all are, and they're all scared. All these hobbits, small creatures who are like 4 foot tall or whatever. All they just do is stab them, take the ring, and then you admire it and you go on. But it's movie logic, so we got to see him reach out, try to touch it. And then when he takes his hand back, he's like, "Oh, you're not going to give it to me?" And he stabs him. It doesn't make any sense. But we suspend our disbelief we get into the ambience of the music and the visuals, and we get transported. So maybe I enjoy the film, but I think that we can't overlook the fact that some of the aspects of it are weak. But if I had to give it, I would say this movie is one of the best fantasy films ever made. I don't rewatch fantasy films in general, and this one I've seen a few times now. And my wife makes me watch it every once in a while. She watches The Hobbit too, which is one I will never finish. Horrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the music. It's interesting to me how the music is really setting up the tone for all of these different characters, right? So the hobbits are very just on an instrument level, right? It's very like happy-go-lucky flute, kind of thing, right? So it's like just setting up the hobbits as a spiritual kind of mindset in that,
Yeah.
and then the stark contrast to that is like the very brass heavy evil stuff, which is in my opinion is kind of the best music theme in this whole movie. But so that's interesting. It's very iconic in that, like, I think a lot of the music that's happening here is super iconic now, and again, holds up extremely well. I think visually it holds up very well. I mean, it put New Zealand back on the map, literally, for a lot of people, right? Like, it's like this trilogy has done more for New Zealand as an industry, I think, than anything else.
True.
And just just realizing that it's a 20-year-old movie at this point, it's quite remarkable that it's still looking so good, unlike the third one.
Totally agree with you on that. I think that of all the three films, this one holds up the best.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the visuals stand out, and I was actually quite impressed with it. I will say that. I mean, I think I've said all I need to say about this film. Honestly, I think that the movie is amazing, but you really have to pull up your pants and sit down for 3 hours to enjoy it. We can always break it down into periods and watch it in chunks, but I think that the movie holds up quite well. The movie is 20 years old, like you said, and because of the lack of like big fight scenes, like most of the fights are happening on open land,
Mm-hmm.
where people are chasing each other. I think it survives. I think the one that you could say was probably like the weakest was when he met Balrog in what was Mjordor? What was the name of that place? Mjolnir, the cave with the dwarves that have all died.
Moria.
Morias. Thank you. Balrog is probably the creature that has least survived time, and maybe the big orcs, whatever they call them, that had the stuff that was just trying to kill the
that troll, I think.
the trolls.
Yeah.
Yes, the trolls. Man, I am bad with all this fantasy stuff. The trolls didn't age too well, but I think that the movie did well. I think the movie has done well.
Yeah, I actually think that, now that I think about it, the fight that I find is the most kind of time wasting one is that giant squid in front of Moria. Like, that's just unnecessary and like. Yeah, I don't know. That just felt like, oh yeah, I remember this now. Like, that's just, I don't know. That could have been cut for time. And just realizing we watched the theatrical cut again, so not the extended one. So the extended one is another 40 minutes or so. So that's an investment, right? I also realized there's a lot of slow-mo in this movie. I don't know if you've noticed it, but there's a lot of just whenever there's this heartfelt emotion. It's always in slow motion, and it's like, no wonder this thing's 3 hours long.
You know, the giant squid, if there was a situation where we saw the giant squid later in the film, then you would say, hey, it wasn't a waste of time. But the fact that the giant squid existed there and all they just had to do was go into the cave and that was the end of that story. Yeah, they could have cut that.
Yeah.
They could have, I mean, we never saw it again. So I think this was just Peter Jackson going, but we made it. I want it in the film.
It's in the book. It's got to be in the film.
But yeah, I think irrespective of that, like we said, reiterated a few times, it's still a really good film. And I think that the numerous fans all over the world who love this film, including myself, even if I don't like it as much as everybody, appreciate the film for what it is.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I like this better than the third. And I think I agree with your assessment that the second is probably the best. That's number 2, and then the third is 3. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Definitely. God, Helm's Deep. Ugh. Helm's Deep. All right. That's all I have for this week. I think the next movie we're doing is Fight Club, right?
That is correct.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what we have to say about that one.
Yep. Likewise. And we may have a guest for that one. So
we may.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Where can people find us?
You can find us at Movie Mistrial on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And where else can they find us?
moviemistrial.com, or if you want to send us an email, contact@moviemistrial.com.
Thank you very much, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks everybody. Take care.